Welcome back to Tabletop Titans and another Titans Tactics. My name is Liam and today we're going to talk about which faction is the best faction for a beginner in Warhammer 40k. Of course, if you enjoy this content, please make sure you smash that like button to tell everybody that you like it, including YouTube. Smash that subscribe button if you haven't already and hit that bell notification to be notified every single time we drop a video. So Warhammer 40k is a massive game with a ton of factions and loads of options for new players coming to the tabletop. In fact, it can be a little bit overwhelming for a new player to work out which faction they want to collect when they're getting started in Warhammer 40k. So I'm here to tell you why I think World Eaters are probably the best beginner faction in the game right now. There's 6 main reasons for this. The simple rules, they have less unit options than other factions, they're quite fast to play, the rules are quite forgiving, they have a ton of cool models, and they have fun narrative. So we'll start with the simplicity of the rules. Their Legion trait is actually really simple. It's just +1 strength and attack if you charge or are charged, or if you perform a heroic intervention. No complexity in that. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. If you charge your opponent, if your opponent charges you, or if you heroically intervene, you get +1 strength, +1 attack. Really easy. Their Super Doctrine, their army-wide special rule that they get access to is Blood Tithe. Blood Tithe is also relatively easy to understand. You generate points for killing friend or foe. So if you die, you gain points. If your opponent dies, you gain points. You can use them for abilities that are applied army-wide rather than specific units in specific circumstances, and the abilities are then active for the rest of the game with the exception of one ability, which is the one that allows you to bring your Demon Primarch back. But that aside, it applies to the whole army, it applies for the rest of the game. Very, very easy, not situational. It's not like AdMech doctrines and Doctrina imperatives where you have to pick this but you get this negative and it only applies for this turn and it only applies to this kind of models. This is something that's active for your whole army for the rest of the game once you choose to spend those Blood Tithe points. Finally, strats, warlord traits and relics. Depending on whether you go World Eaters Legion or Disciples of the Red Angel, you only have access to 8 stratagems, you only have access to 3 warlord traits, you only have access to 3 relics, and in terms of warlord traits and relics, you can only take 1 warlord trait on 1 relic. There is no access to extra warlord traits and extra relics for World Eaters, so you don't have to remember tons of extra rules that you have given other characters. Super simple, super easy. So what do simple rules mean? Well, simple rules mean they're quite fast to play on the whole, which is also great for a new player who may be concerned about how much time he's taking in his turns at the tabletop. If you eradicate a certain number of phases of the game because your army is simpler to play, then you don't have to worry so much about how long you're taking. So we'll start with the command phase. Well, with the exception of Angron, the army really doesn't have any access to anything that they can do in the command phase. Angron has a couple of abilities that he can use in the command phase. That's about it. The rest of the army just doesn't really operate there. So realistically, unless you're taking Angron, you don't have to worry about the command phase. Now the movement phase is also relatively simple, the majority of it being vehicles or infantry. They get to move super fast, infantry can move through ruins, so you're not really massively restricted. Actually, infantry is one of the phases where you'll take a little bit longer with World Eaters, but it's not a complicated or a complex phase. Movement is movement. You just move your models and you just have to make sure that you're aware of whether they can or can't move through certain items of terrain, depending on the terrain key regs. We move on to the psychic phase. You're silly. World Eaters. You don't have a psychic phase. You don't do witches. None of this witches. No. Stop it. Stop talking about psychic. We're gonna skip over it. There's no psychic. It's World Eaters. And we move to the shooting phase, which arguably is another phase that you could entirely skip. In fact, I've played World Eaters recently where I haven't used the shooting phase at all. I have bolt guns and combi bolters and it just isn't worth it. So I haven't shot. Now you can take Land Raiders and you can take Forge Fiends and you can in the future introduce some shooting to your army, but really if you stick to the core units that World Eaters really want to use when you look at the stratagems, etc. they have access to, you basically don't really have an effective shooting phase. So you can skip the psychic phase and you can skip the shooting phase. There's 2 major phases of the game now removed for World Eaters. And then we move into the 5th and final, that's glorious, glorious melee. This is where World Eaters not only really shine, but they also keep it quite simple. Each unit typically is only going to have 1 different weapon from the core weapons for that particular squad. So Berserkers may take a heavy chainglaive. Exalted 8-bound may take the Eviscerator and Chain Fists. You typically have 2 weapon profiles to deal with. Now that makes it much, much easier when you're pooling up your dice and getting ready to throw your attacks. And the only real time sink here is you're going to have a lot of dice. 10 Berserkers on the charge generate a ton of attacks, which is great fun, but it's still quite quick because you can fast roll because they're typically all the same weapon profile. So this army is fast to play. I'd be very surprised if players really struggled to finish within their time frame at the tabletop in something like a GT type setting. Now, there's two big reasons why any player may choose to start any faction. We're going to touch on both of them now. We're going to start with the narrative. World Eaters have a really cool narrative. They have a ton of history since they started back in the Horus Heresy. They have amazing new lore with Angron's return, so it's just been refreshed and updated, and they've added in new narrative that you can sink your teeth into that is currently relevant in the 40k setting about Angron and his return and the rampaging World Eaters. And the rules that they have within their codex also typically matches their pretty cool narrative as well, which is a really good place for a faction to be. If you read about a faction's narrative and you get really invested in that narrative and you start to collect that faction and you look into the codex and the rules and you find those rules don't really reflect the narrative as you see it, that can be really disheartening. But with World Eaters, that's not the case. The faction definitely represents the narrative whilst they're being played on the tabletop. So the second reason why you'd pick a faction is the model range. World Eaters are in a great space and a relatively safe space right now because they've just had a new range refresh. Terminators and Khan aren't brand new, nor are Rhinos or Spawn, nor some of the Predators, but the core units that you're going to be using in World Eaters on the whole are all new models. That means two things. One, they're super cool because they're new models, and secondly, they're not looking at being refreshed anytime soon. There would be nothing more disheartening than going out there and buying 4 boxes of Khorne Berserkers only to find 7 days later Games Workshop announce a range refresh and more are coming. Well, that's not a risk for World Eaters because they've just had brand new Berserkers, they've just had brand new 8-bound, they've just had a brand new Lord on Juggernaut, and most importantly, they have a cool, massive centerpiece in Angron. And I would suspect that a lot of players really love to have a cool, massive centerpiece in their Warhammer 40k army. Angron definitely offers you that opportunity. So they've got a cool set of models that look amazing, and Games Workshop have done a great job with them, and they're probably not going to get updated for a very, very long time. It's a great place for a hobbyist to be in if they're picking a new faction. So talking about the model range, actually it's very interesting looking at how many datasheets are in the codex. So with the new range release from World Eaters, they only essentially released 5 new box sets, some of which can build multiple different units. However, looking in the codex, there's only 20 datasheets in the whole codex. Now, to add some context, 20 datasheets is how many HQ options Space Marines have. Space Marines are supposed to be the gateway into Warhammer 40k. They have 20 HQ options. They have over 90 datasheets in their codex, and that doesn't include Forge World or extra releases that are coming out as part of extra box sets like Strike Force Augustus. So only having 20 datasheets means there's less rules that you need to learn because you don't have so many datasheets. You're probably not even including all 20 datasheets in your army, and there's less keywords and less interaction with stratagems. Again, if you have 20 datasheets, you will probably not have 20 completely different keywords, and stratagems that interact with certain keywords are then less of a problem as you try and work out, does it have the right keyword, is it in the right place? You just don't have any of that nonsense. 20 datasheets is a really nice place to be. I would actually argue Space Marines, who are supposed to be the gateway drug for Warhammer 40k, have far too many and can be wildly overwhelming. Now, we talk about a reduced number of stratagems down to a reduced number of warlord traits and a reduced number of relics. We talk about less data sheets. We talk about the army being fast to play. But actually, the army's rules are also quite forgiving, which does remove some of the stress of getting things wrong. So there's minimal rules, as we've just sort of alluded to. There's less rules than some other factions, and those rules are actually quite simple on the whole. We don't have squads with 10 different weapon options. We don't have crazy combinations. We don't have doctrines that only work at certain times that we have to change. We haven't got to map out command protocols. We don't have to worry about if we're in an aura or if we're in an aura within an aura. We don't have to worry about synaptic link. It's very, very simple. The World Eaters rules are also quite efficient. Typically, if a World Eaters unit does hit another unit in combat and melee and you've picked your targets well, not perfectly, but well, they're going to, in normal circumstances, do quite a lot of damage to that enemy unit. And therefore, they are actually quite efficient in what they do. And finally, if we do look at competitive 40k for World Eaters, their secondaries are also pretty simple and pretty forgiving. They can be achieved in every single battle round and every single turn, and it just basically requires you to do what the army wants to do. You need to go out there and kill things in melee, and your units also need to die, and you can use blood tithe points. So they're simple secondaries that are also easy to score and easy to achieve, that also work in coherence of how the army wants to work. It's a beautiful package of forgiving rules, meaning that you can score well even if you're not playing the best game of 40k. So based on everything I've just told you, here's my 2,000 point list idea if you were starting World Eater, something to keep it super simple. This list is also scalable, so you could start at 500 points and scale up to 2,000 points as well. We start with Lord Invocatus. Lord Invocatus would be the Warlord, and the reason why he would be the Warlord is because he has a great Warlord trait, so you would pay for him to have his Warlord trait, and he can move 2 core units plus himself before the game begins. That's super nice. He then has a very simplistic aura, which is everything within 6 inches of him that is core gets plus 2 inches to their move. Super nice, super simple. We love to see it. The second HQ choice, I'd have a Chaos Lord and Juggernaut. He has the exact same aura as Lord Invocatus. So there's a little bit of overlap there. If you get one of them wrong or slightly out of position, then you can rely on the second one to give you that aura. Importantly, this list doesn't have any reroll ones to hit aura. It doesn't have any reroll ones to wound aura. It has no reroll auras whatsoever, actually. It's just additional movement to keep that movement phase fast, allow you to move as far as you would like to move. A little bit of overlap, a little bit of redundancy, no complicated stuff, no command phase stuff, keeping it simple. I've then got 2 units of 10 Jackals, mostly because points and also because you want units to die, to generate your blood tithe, to get some of your other army special rules up and running. I have 6 units of 5 Khorne Berserkers. All of them have an icon and an eviscerator. The icon gives you access to a stratagem to roll 3d6, discard the lowest, to make your charges a little bit more reliable, also more forgiving for new players. And the eviscerator is just a cool extra weapon that hits like a tank. I've got 2 units of 5 8-bound, and the sergeants and 8-bound are just the champions, and 8-bound are just equipped with what they're bog standard equipped with. Super effective units, very fast with Lord Invocatus and a Lord and Juggernaut nearby. Hit like a tank, give you access to red butchers, and they're a great core unit, which means that you can use the fight on death stratagem because they're an infantry unit, and you can use the pile-in stratagem, not the pile-in stratagem, the heroic intervention stratagem because they're a core unit. It's really good. I've got 2 units of 3 Exalted 8-bound. The data sheets are basically the same as 8-bound with some very minor variants. They have a 4+ invulnerable save instead of a 5+, and they have a 2+ weapon skill instead of a 3+. But these units can go and operate independently. They don't have core. They don't benefit from any of those core benefit bonuses, so you can just move them off and not have to worry about keeping them in range of anything else. They're great little solo units to go and do things, murder things, die on objectives, etc. We've got 3 single Chaos Spawn. Spawn are there to die and generate you blood tithe, but they're also super fast, and you run them on objectives and let your opponent think about whether they do or don't want to kill that horrible little nasty Chaos Spawn, knowing that you're going to get a blood tithe point. And if you're playing Grand Tournament, you're probably also going to drown that objective in blood for another victory point, which is super tasty. And I've then got 2 Rhinos. You can put 20 of your Berserkers in 2 of these Rhinos. So 2 units of 5 in one, 2 units of 5 in the other, 2 units of 5 in Strategic Reserve or back on your home objective or whatever you want to do. Just a little bit of armor. Again, if those 2 vehicles get destroyed, you get extra blood tithe points. Gives you a little bit more speed, a little bit more protection, a little bit more mobility. And if you give those Rhinos extra combi bolters each, you're basically at exactly 2,000 points. So we've talked about why I think World Eaters are the best faction for a beginner in Warhammer 40k right now, and I've even given you a list idea that try and utilises that simplicity and stops people from getting overwhelmed at the tabletop when they play their games of Warhammer 40k for the first time. Of course, they're not the only faction that would be good for beginners. I'm sure there's tons of other options and ideas out there. So what I really want is for you guys to jump in the comments below and let me know which faction you think is the best faction for a beginner, but also let me know why. I think it'd be an interesting discussion. Let me know why you think that faction would be a good faction, potentially why it would be a better faction than World Eaters. I also might be on a bit of a World Eaters high right now. You can probably tell. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Like I said at the start, smash that like button if you have enjoyed this content. But that will be all for me. We'll catch you all next time on the tabletop.